So, picking up where we left off a second ago, if I try to create a relationship and enforce referential integrity on that relationship, like this, and access gives me this error, what it's basically telling you is you have a supplier ID in this table that doesn't exist in here. So in other words, you've typed in a bogus supplier ID. Now, this is why I was saying earlier on that when you go to enter those values, they have to be exact. You could make a mistake entering supplier ID here or here. So who knows which one's actually typed in right. You have to go back and look at your typed in values to find out the problem. Now in this example, we know that the problem is this first record. I changed that 377 from 374 to 377. So if I backspace, put that 4 back on there like that, now go and create my relationship again and enforce referential integrity, then it works. I don't get the error message and I can see that that happens. Now, if I go into the supplier table or the product table again and now try to change this back to 377 like this, it'll stop me. It'll say, wait, you can't do that because that supplier ID doesn't exist. So it stops you from making the error. That's the benefit of having referential integrity. So what hopefully you conclude from this is that why would I go and start populating tables with data in them before I create the relationship? And the answer is you shouldn't. All right, now this book shows you the way that the book does this is it has you populate before creating relationships. Horrible idea. You should always create your tables first, create your relationships, and then populate with the data. Because if you do that, then you won't be able to type in a bad supplier ID in this example because it's going to stop you from ever making the mistake. If you go in and you enter all your data and then you try to enforce referential integrity like we just did a minute ago, we knew where the mistake was because I showed you. But if you typed in hundreds of records and then you try to enforce referential integrity, now you're going to have to try to figure out where those errors are, which is a kind of a task that's difficult to do. There are methods to do it, but it's one of those things where if you can avoid it, avoid it. So the way that you avoid it is by creating the relationships first and then populating the data. Okay, one last thing then. One thing that we didn't talk about, if I reopen the relationships window, just double click on that thin line, enforce referential integrity. We know that that means that the primary key of this table determines what are acceptable values in the foreign key there. Well, what would happen if I go in and I decide to change my supplier IDs? I want to change them to something other than what they currently are. I want to add, I don't know, I want to do something different. Well, if I change it here, then that's going to cause a problem because I have that supplier ID here. Cascade updates means that if I change it here, those changes are going to cascade down to this one and update. And you guessed it, cascade deletes is the same thing. If I delete the supplier, it would go in and delete the product. This one's a little bit less often used. This one's very commonly used. It only works from the one to the many, though. In other words, if I make a change to the supplier ID here, it's not going to go up and change the supplier here, right? It'll only work cascaded downward. So you'll see what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to open up the supplier table, and GRE364 was the supplier that we were looking at over here so much. So let's say that I want to change this from GRE364 to GRE366. So I make that change there, and now if I go open up the product table, you'll see all of these have GRE366 because cascade updates doesn't work. I'll change this back to 364 like that, reopen the product table, and they're all back to 364. So that's what updates does. Now again, I can't go this way, right? I can't do it from the product table to the supplier table. It's going to say you can't do that. So it always has to come from the one to the many in order for the cascade update to work. And the same holds true for cascade deletes. If I had cascade deletes enforced here, and I go to the product table or to the supplier table and delete that particular, if I went into here and I just deleted this, then it would delete all the products.